One was a female, who had grievous ill wrought in revenge, and she enjoyed it still. Sullen she was, and threatening, in her I glared the stern triumph that she dared to die. Crab. The summons of preparation arrived after Jeanie Deans had resided in the metropolis about 3 weeks. On the morning appointed she took a grateful farewell of Mrs. Glass, as that good woman's attention to her particularly required, placed herself and her movable goods, which purchases and presents had greatly increased, in a hackney coach, and joined her travelling companions in the housekeeper's apartment at Argyle House. While the carriage was getting ready, she was informed that the Duke wished to speak with her, and being ushered into a splendid saloon, she was surprised to find that he wished to present her to his lady and daughters. "I bring you my little countrywoman, Duchess," these were the words of the introduction. "With an army of young fellows, as gallant and steady as she is, and a good cause, I would not fear 2 to 1. "Ah, Papa," said a lively young lady, about 12 years old, "remember you were full 1 to 2 at Sheriffmuir, and yet, singing the well-known ballad. Some say that we won, and some say that they won, and some say that none won a man, but of anything I'm sure, that on Sheriffmuir a battle there was that I saw, man. What, little Mary turned Tory on my hands, this will be fine news for our countrywoman to carry down to Scotland." "We may all turn Tories for the thanks we have got for remaining Whigs," said the second young lady. "Well, hold your peace, you discontented monkeys, and go dress your babies, and as for the Bob of Dunblane, if it wasna we'll bob it, we'll bob it, we'll bob it, if it wasna we'll bob it, we'll bob it again." "Papa's wit is running low," said Lady Mary. "The poor gentleman is repeating himself. He sang that on the field of battle, when he was told the Highlanders had cut his left wing to pieces with their claymores." A pull by the hair was the repartee to this sally. "Ah! Brave Highlanders and bright claymores," said the Duke, "well do I wish them, for the ill they've done me yet, as the song goes to, but come, madcaps, say a civil word to your countrywoman. I wish she had half her Kenny Hamley sense. I think you may be as leal and true-hearted." The Duchess advanced, and, in a few words, in which there was as much kindness as civility, assured Jeanie of the respect which she had for a character so affectionate, and yet so firm, and added, "When you get home, you will perhaps hear from me." "And from me." "And from me." "And from me, Jeanie," added the young ladies one after the other, "for you are a credit to the land we love so well." Jeanie, overpowered by these unexpected compliments, and not aware that the Duke's investigation had made him acquainted with her behavior on her sister's trial, could only answer by blushing, and courtesying round and round, and uttering at intervals, "Mony thanks. Mony thanks." "Jeanie," said the Duke, "you must have Doc and Doric, or you will be unable to travel." There was a salver with cake and wine on the table. He took up a glass, drank "To all true hearts that load Scotland," and offered a glass to his guest. Jeanie, however, declined it, saying that she had never tasted wine in her life. "How comes that, Jeanie?" said the Duke. "Wine mocketh glad the heart, you know." "Aye, sir, but my father is like Jonadab the son of Rechab, who charged his children that they should drink no wine." "I thought your father would have had more sense," said the Duke, "unless indeed he prefers brandy. But, however, Jeanie, if you will not drink, you must eat, to save the character of my house." He thrust upon her a large piece of cake, nor would he permit her to break off a fragment, and lay the rest on a salver. "Put it in your pouch, Jeanie," said he, "you will be glad of it before you see St. Giles's steeple. I wish to heaven I were to see it as soon as you. And so my best service to all my friends at and about Auld Reekie, and a blithe journey to you." And, mixing the frankness of a soldier with his natural affability, he shook hands with his protégée, and committed her to the charge of Archibald, satisfied that he had provided sufficiently for her being attended to by his domestics, from the unusual attention with which he had himself treated her. Accordingly, in the course of her journey, she found both her companions disposed to pay her every possible civility, so that her return, in point of comfort and safety, formed a strong contrast to her journey to London. Her heart also was disburdened of the weight of grief, shame, apprehension, and fear, which had loaded her before her interview with the Queen at Richmond. But the human mind is so strangely capricious, that, when freed from the pressure of real misery, it becomes open and sensitive to the apprehension of ideal calamities. She was now much disturbed in mind, that she had heard nothing from Reuben Butler, to whom the operation of writing was so much more familiar than it was to herself. "It would have cost him a sae little fash," she said to herself, "for I hae seen his pen gone as fast ower the paper, as ever it did ower the water when it was in the grey goose's wing. Wae's me! Maybe he may be badly, but then my father wad likely hae said something about it, or maybe he may hae ta'en the rue, and kensna how to let me what of his change of mind. He needna be at muckle fash about it," she went on, drawing herself up, though the tear of honest pride and injured affection gathered in her eye, as she entertained the suspicion, Jeanie Deans is no the last to pu him by the sleeve, or put him in mind of what he wishes to forget. I shall wish him weel and happy a' the same, and if he has the luck to get a kirk in our country, I sall gang and hear him just the very same, to show that I bear nae malice. And as she imagined the scene, the tears stole over her eye. In these melancholy reveries, Jeanie had full time to indulge herself, for her travelling companions, servants in a distinguished and fashionable family, had, of course, many topics of conversation, in which it was absolutely impossible she could have either pleasure or portion. She had, therefore, abundant leisure for reflection, and even for self-tormenting, during the several days which, indulging the young horses the Duke was sending down to the north with sufficient ease in short stages, they occupied in reaching the neighbourhood of Carlisle. In approaching the vicinity of that ancient city, they discerned a considerable crowd upon an eminence at a little distance from the high road, and learned from some passengers who were gathering towards that busy scene from the southward, that the cause of the concourse was the laudable public desire to see a doomed Scotch witch and thief get half of her due Upo Harabibru yonder, for she was only to be hanged, she should hae been born alive, and cheap on't. "Dear Mr. Archibald," said the dame of the dairy elect, "I never seed a woman hanged in a' my life, and only 4 men, as made a goodly spectacle." Mr. Archibald, however, was a Scotchman, and promised himself no exuberant pleasure in seeing his countrywoman undergo the terrible behests of law. Moreover, he was a man of sense and delicacy in his way, and the late circumstances of Jeanie's family, with the cause of her expedition to London, were not unknown to him, so that he answered drily, it was impossible to stop, as he must be early at Carlisle on some business of the Duke's, and he accordingly bid the postilions get on. The road at that time passed at about 1/4 of a mile's distance from the eminence, called Harrowby or Harrowbybrow, which, though it is very moderate in size and height, is nevertheless seen from a great distance around, owing to the flatness of the country through which the Eden flows. Here many an outlaw, and border rider of both kingdoms, had wavered in the wind during the wars, and scarce less hostile truces, between the two countries. Upon Harrowby, in latter days, other executions had taken place with as little ceremony as compassion, for these frontier provinces remain long unsettled, and, even at the time of which we write, were ruder than those in the centre of England. The postilions drove on, wheeling as the Penrith road led them, round the verge of the rising ground. Yet still the eyes of Mrs. Dolly Dutton, which, with the head and substantial person to which they belonged, were all turned towards the scene of action, could discern plainly the outline of the gallows tree, relieved against the clear sky, the dark shade formed by the persons of the executioner and the criminal upon the light rounds of the tall aerial ladder, until one of the objects, launched into the air, gave unequivocal signs of mortal agony, though appearing in the distance not larger than a spider dependent at the extremity of his invisible thread, while the remaining form descended from its elevated situation, and regained with all speed an undistinguished place among the crowd. This termination of the tragic scene drew forth of course a squall from Mrs. Dutton, and Jeanie, with instinctive curiosity, turned her head in the same direction. The sight of a female culprit in the act of undergoing the fatal punishment from which her beloved sister had been so recently rescued, was too much, not perhaps for her nerves, but for her mind and feelings. She turned her head to the other side of the carriage, with a sensation of sickness, of loathing, and of fainting. Her female companion overwhelmed her with questions, with proffers of assistance, with requests that the carriage might be stopped, that a doctor might be fetched, that drops might be gotten, that burnt feathers and asafoetida, fair water, and hartshorn, might be procured, all at once, and without one instant's delay. Archibald, more calm and considerate, only desired the carriage to push forward, and it was not till they had got beyond sight of the fatal spectacle, that, seeing the deadly paleness of Jeannie's countenance, he stopped the carriage, and jumping out himself, went in search of the most obvious and most easily procured of Mrs. Dutton's pharmacopoeia, a draught, namely, of fair water. While Archibald was absent on this good-natured piece of service, damming the ditches which produced nothing but mud, and thinking upon the 1,000 bubbling springlets of his own mountains, the attendants on the execution began to pass the stationary vehicle in their way back to Carlisle. From their half-heard and half-understood words, Jeannie, whose attention was involuntarily riveted by them, as that of children is by ghost stories, though they know the pain with which they will afterwards remember them, Jeannie, I say, could discern that the present victim of the law had died game, as it is termed by those unfortunates, that is, sullen, reckless, and impenitent, neither fearing God nor regarding man. "A stour wife, and a dour," said one Cumbrian peasant, as he clattered by in his wooden brogues, with a noise like the trampling of a dray horse. "She has gone a home master, with Ho's name in her mouth," said another. "Shame the country should be harried why Scotch witches and Scotch bitches the skate, but I say hang and drown." "Aye, Gaffer Tramp, take awa Yilden, take awa lo, hang the witch, and there will be less scathe amang us, mine owls hae been wreckin this tomont." "And mine bairns hae been crying too, mon," replied his neighbor. "Silence why your fuel tongues, ye churls," said an old woman, who hobbled past them, as they stood talking near the carriage. This was nae witch, but a bluety-fingered thief and murderess. "Aye. Was it Ian say, Dame Hinchup," said one in a civil tone, and stepping out of his place to let the old woman pass along the footpath. "Nay, ye know best, sure, but at ony rate, we hae but tint a Scot of her, and that's a thing better lost than found." The old woman passed on without making any answer. Aye, neighbor," said Gaffer Tramp, "sayest thou how one which will speak for t'other, Scots or English, the same to them?" His companion shook his head, and replied in the same subdued tone, Aye, when a Sarkfoot wife gets on her broomstick, the dames of Allenby are ready to mount, just as sure as the byword gangs o' the hills,